The ideas of social democracy were to change the society into a more equal one, gradually through the reform of the law. This was happening in Germany to some extent. This was definitely happening in Britain, but in some other places in the world, this was not working at all. And probably if you think of the atrocities that were sparked by Marxist ideas, you think, hopefully, about the Russian Revolution and what happened in Russia after the fall of the Tsars. What we have is the first communist state, which, at least in theory, wanted to follow the ideals of Marx. And the two men responsible for the creation of this state, among many. This is a very interesting topic, and you can find lots of interesting materials about how the revolution happened in Russia and what went wrong. But the two names that I hope everybody knows are Vladimir Lenin and Joseph Stalin. So the two great, terrifying leaders of the proletariat, of the working class. Vladimir Lenin, the leader of the revolution, who was a very, I would say, careful reader of Marx's books. He believed, like Marx did, that the proletariat has been bribed and basically they were diverted from starting the revolution. So he came up with a solution. He wrote a pamphlet called What is to be Done? And he believed that what is to be done is to have professional revolutionists. So people who would overturn the status quo professionally. It started in 1905 with the first revolution that was more or less in the spirit of social democracy through constitutional reform. But then in 1917, the October Revolution, led by the professional revolutionists, started and overthrew even those more peaceful reforms. What happened was like the French Revolution gone wild, but even worse. Terror, hunger, attempts to spread a revolution overseas through military invasion. You are probably aware that in 1920 Soviet Russia tried to invade Poland. They were not successful, but they tried. After Lenin died in 1924, the role of the leader passed to his great rival, Joseph Stalin, who became the dictator of the Soviet Union, who gave up the idea of military conquest, but he really wanted to transform the Soviet Union into the perfect communist state by very drastic means. So we have more terror, we have the hunger in Ukraine, the artificially created hunger really, to crush the opposition inside. We have the so-called Great Purge, with up to 1 million people being killed in the 1930s. And this situation, which was very dramatic, continued until the Second World War and the clash with another terrifying dictatorship, that is of the Nazi Germany. So here we have Marx and his followers very often using much more drastic methods. And let's now look at the extreme right wing, because this was, the communism is of course on the left wing side. On the right wing we have something that starts well enough in the 19th century, the rise of nationalism, the rise of national awareness, the belief in the nation, and the belief that the new countries should be based on national identity and nothing else. So we have quite a few new countries emerging in the 19th century, the big ones like Italy or Germany that were just unifying smaller sections of geography, and smaller countries that were developing from the fallen empires, the Russian Empire and the Ottoman Empire, so the Empire of the Tsars and the Turkish Empire of the Sultans. These two old empires were crumbling, mostly because they were not based on national identity, and all those national groups wanted to have independent countries of their own. Countries like Greece, Serbia, Poland, Romania, Bulgaria. The countries that were not uniting smaller units of land, but that were actually taking apart larger empires. This is what happens in Poland, of course. In the 19th century, we have different phases of Polish nationalism, mostly romantic and positivist, so either by creating positive images of heroes from history or by education and increasing the awareness from the bottom up, so even starting with the working class. The idea was to regain independent statehood. Of course, we succeeded, but not everywhere it went so well, because in some countries like Italy or Germany, those big countries that started to play an important role in the 19th century, the nationalism went too far, you might say. They started to introduce authoritarian ideology opposed to liberalism, Marxism and anarchism. So the idea that it should be a one-party state with no opposition, the idea that they should have a strong, charismatic leader. Very quickly the militaristic aspect arrived, and there was violence again. So as a famous philosopher and cultural scholar, Slavoj Žižek, said, fascism is a conservative revolution. Think about it. Fascism is a conservative revolution. So we have a revolution like in those left-wing communist states, but it is conservative right-wing political views, such as nationalism, traditional gender roles, very often also including religious beliefs. It could be a state religion, like later in Germany, or it could be some other dominant religion, like versions of Christianity. Anything really that makes it easier to introduce a hierarchical society. So very conservative, right-wing political views. Sometimes you might have left-wing economic tactics like planned economy and redistribution of goods, but in fact it is right-wing conservative revolution. This is what happened in Italy under Benito Mussolini, and this is of course what happened in Germany under Adolf Hitler. And in Germany, fascism developed into Nazis, that is National Socialism. Not much to do with socialism really. It was a radical version of fascism, which also started to include things like racism, anti-Semitism. It was against things like modernist art. So even the artistic expression had to be very conservative and traditionalist. They introduced a version of state religion in which the figure of the leader was worshipped. So the next thing I'd like to show you is another graph which shows the political spectrum from left to right with two extreme aspects marked in red here as what I and many scholars would call really dangerous. So dictatorships, either extreme left-wing or extreme right-wing, they share a lot of common features. So we have some similarities. For example, both extreme right-wing and extreme left-wing political systems are totalitarian. They believe that the state has absolute power over the individual. They believe in the powerful military. They have all kinds of institutions such as the secret police, the censorship, the propaganda. So this is how relatively modest and safe political systems such as socialism and conservatism can develop into their extreme, dangerous, evil twins, communism and fascism. So it's not the matter of the views, it's the matter of the extremity of the views that is really dangerous. So what we have is the map here of the Cold War period after the Second World War, with the Western Bloc based around the USA and NATO in blue, and the Eastern Bloc based around the Soviet Union in red. This was the situation before the fall of communism in the 1980s. And the last thing I would like to talk with you today about is the cultural aspect of that, and the cultural aspect embodied by one of the most famous and also most controversial groups of culture scholars, philosophers and intellectuals called the Frankfurt School. Here you have some names and faces of these people like Max Horkheimer, Theodor Adorno, Erich Fromm, Herbert Marcuse. They were not the only ones, but these are the most important members. It all started in Frankfurt when they established in the 1920s the Institute for Social Research, which was left-wing, which was inspired by Marx, but it was Marx without the economy. Because many of those scholars were of Jewish descent, even none of them practically was religious, when the Nazis came to power in Germany, they had to escape for their lives, and they mostly escaped to America. They stayed either in Columbia University in New York or in Berkeley University in California. Many of them returned to Frankfurt after the war, although some, like Herbert Marcuse, stayed in the USA. And about their ideas, what I say is Marxism without the economy. So they mostly are credited for introducing the concept of sexual revolution and critical theory to the cultural studies. What they believed, like Marx, is that the society is based on conflict. But it doesn't have to be the economical conflict between the rich and the poor, between the capitalists and the workers. It could be any kind of conflict which is based on hierarchical social structures, such as traditional family, education system, religious systems, work systems. They believe they are oppressive, and this all goes down to the conflict between nature and culture. And for the Frankfurt School members, nature was good because it was natural, And culture was bad because it was created by humans. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, anyone? So here we have some possible dualities, some possible conflicts. Authority versus freedom, parents versus children, teachers versus students, morality versus sex, work versus play, productivity versus creativity. And told you already, they were fleeing from the Nazi oppression, and they knew what happened to other Jews who left, who stayed in Europe. So they were all asking themselves the question, how on earth was it possible that Western Europe, the most advanced place in the world, in the opinion of many people then, produced something so horrible as the concentration camps? And they believed that it's not the matter of overturning human nature. It is the matter of degree. Like the degree between, let's say, socialism and communism, or conservatism and fascism. We have certain predispositions in the human mind not to oppose evil until evil is so powerful it cannot be opposed anymore. So what we have is a very important book published by Theodor Adorno and some other scholars in 1950, in which they worked up a kind of scale. They called it the F scale, F for fascist. The book was called The Authoritarian Personality. And again, you may want to look it up online and perhaps look at the questions that they were asking their respondents. So what were the aspects of natural, normal, healthy human personality that could be abused by evil ideologies? Things like conventionalism, authoritarian submission, so being polite and nice to the bully, authoritarian aggression, becoming the bully yourself, anti-intellectualism, superstition, stereotypy, the power, the belief and glorification of power and toughness. So you have to be strong, you have to be a man. So the masculinity defined as physical strength and aggression. Exaggerated concerns over sex as well. This is something that can be abused by evil ideologies, according to the members of the Frankfurt School. So the last thing is quite interesting, the exaggerated concerns over sex, because it kind of links Marx and Freud. So the economic repression that Marx discussed is changed into psychological repression, which is mostly caused by the frustration over repressed sexuality. We have some more names here, like Erich Fromm and Herbert Marcuse from Frankfurt School. Another name you may hear in this context is Wilhelm Reich, who was a psychoanalyst, a student of Dr. Freud. And he was mostly interested in human sexuality. He even believed there was like a kind of force in the world, to use a kind of Star Wars simile, which he called the Orgon, which was like the sexual force of all the living creatures, and this was the powerful force in the universe. Of course, he never managed to prove it, but the ideas represented by the members of the Frankfurt School was that sexuality is the most basic human instinct. For most people, with the exception of a few who are asexual, this is actually true. Culture, so all these oppressive traditional institutions, family, religion, education, sublimates the sexual instinct into productivity. They want to distract people, especially young people who are just developing, from thinking about relationships and sexuality into thinking about being productive. learning and working and making things. And of course this causes frustration, and of course this can lead to some psychological problems, which according to the members of the Frankfurt School can eventually lead to becoming victims of evil ideologies. Okay, this was very brief and we continue next week.